Welcome. I'm Nira Berry, host of Happy and Healthy. Join us as we discover and explore so many new things in health and happiness to help you live a healthy and happy life. So, the medical world is happening so fast. It's moving forward with so many new procedures and testing. And I thought it'd be a really good time to maybe shed some light on this. So I brought in my guest today, a wonderful guest named Judith Macon. And Judy is the manager of Cancer Outreach and Education and Risk Assessment Coordinator at Suburban Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. So thank you, Judy, for coming in today.
It's my pleasure, Nira. Thanks for asking me.
Judy, could you just to start out with, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your field and...
Well, I've always primarily done women's health care. I'm a nurse and an educator, but since around 2000, I've been interested in working in cancer genetics, more in breast and ovarian cancer, but more recently I've branched out to colon cancer, prostate cancer, etc. And I think with people hearing about genetic mutations or the Angelina Jolie effect, that is coming more and more into the forefront, and people are wondering, I think, should I be tested? What would I do differently if I knew if I had a genetic mutation? And unfortunately, a lot of people who would be very appropriate for them to have testing, it's not on their radar. So it kind of goes both ways. So my job, I think, is to not only counsel people, but to spread the awareness.
Yeah. So first of all, let's just break it down. Like what is a gene?
What is a gene? Let's just get
we're
basic.
Talking about that.
Okay, let's go back to biology 101, okay? Every human being is made up of 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? Okay. And men and women are pretty much alike in the chromosomes until we get to that last magical set of chromosomes. We are XX, men are XY, and never the twain shall meet. But when you unravel the chromosomes, you have genes, and genes control everything about us, whether it's hair color, eye color, whether we can roll our tongues, how tall we are, whether our earlobes are attached. But, well, it's true. Yeah. But it also can, there are certain genes that help with preventing cancer, and these are called tumor suppression genes, and they act just like they sound. They keep things from growing that shouldn't be growing. And obviously a cancer cell is one of those cells. So all the tumor suppression genes that we know about are on different chromosomes, but none of them are on the X or the Y chromosome. So what that means is that these mutations are kind of equal opportunity mutations. Oh. Men and women can have them. And I found that one misconception is people will say, I have the gene. Well, we're all supposed to have these genes. For example, I think the two we know most about is BRCA1 and BRCA2. It's not that you have them. There's a misspelling or a mutation in the gene, and that's what causes the problem.
I see. And I know that there's several other misconceptions that people have in general about that.
The things that I think of is that some people think it only occurs on your mom's side of the family, so we don't need to look at dad's side of the family. People think that these genes skip generations, like twins. And what happens
Those are kind of like wives' tales, right?
Yeah, and they do make sense when you think about it, because men can have these mutations, but they tend not to show the cancers. So it's not that the mutations skip generations. It may be that not every generation gets cancer. And while cancer risks are elevated, they're not 100%. So it is very possible to have a mutation and never get a cancer.
Yeah. And I know you've also, I've heard you say how, as far as misconceptions go, that people inflate the whole idea of it. That
You're right. You're right. A lot of people think that most cancer is hereditary, and it's not. For example, in breast cancer, only 5 to 10% of women who have breast cancer will have a genetic mutation. So it's really rather low.
Yeah,
it's an important thing to know about.
Yes, than what I've heard about.
Yes, yes. So you're right. It is greatly sort of overestimated, but it's very important for those people and their families to know whether or not they do have a genetic mutation.
So So what is involved in genetic testing in general? Like, it's like, what do people have to do?
Well, when I get phone calls from people and they say, well, why do you have to schedule an appointment? Why do you have to talk to me for 30 to 45 minutes?
Yeah,
because it's just a blood test, right?
Yeah.
And that's
people
true.
don't get that.
It is just a blood test. But what do you do with the information?
Yeah.
So I work with Dr. Carolyn Hendricks at Suburban. We have been doing genetics for many, many years. And we are firm believers that you should know knowledge up front.
Yeah.
Just so you can be thinking about what the implications are, what it would mean for you, what it means for your family. We have had some people who after counseling said, you know what, I don't think I want to do it at this time. And other people who were maybe resistant and said, oh, I'm coming in just because my daughter told me to come in. And they understand all the implications. Then it becomes, oh, I do want to have testing.
Do most people come in on their own, or do you find that most people bring somebody? Or
I would say that a slight greater than 50% come by themselves.
Yeah.
And a lot depends too on whether or not they're coming because they were just diagnosed with cancer, or if they're coming because there's a family history, or there's another member of the family that has a genetic mutation. I find that when somebody has a cancer and they're coming in for genetic testing, they tend to bring somebody else with them.
Are there like a number of people that just come in just because they want information, like information's power? Like, is there, what percentage?
Some people do. I would say that most people that we see have at least a family history.
Yeah.
And a significant family history or a personal history of something. And it's always worth the education. And that's how I like to look at it. It's an educational session. It doesn't mean you're going to go down the road to testing, because really your genes are the same ones that you had yesterday and the ones you'll have tomorrow.
Nothing's gonna change.
When you decide to have testing, it's really on your own time frame.
Yeah. And this information that that you get, it's all kept private, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact,
I think that's important for people to know.
There are federal and state laws that prohibit sharing that kind of information or using it to discriminate for job security or health insurance. But we feel that it's very confidential, and we let the patient tell whomever he or she wants to tell the information to, whether it's their primary care physician, whether it's their dentist. I mean, it just doesn't matter. But we're not the ones that give out the information. They do.
That's important. And how much of cancer is genetic?
Well, I think only about 5 to 10% that we know of right now. The field of genetics is changing so rapidly that the more we know we don't know. And if you think back 20 years ago, for breast cancer, you knew breast cancer gene 1 and breast cancer gene 2, BRCA1, BRCA2. We now know there are other breast cancer genes. We know there's prostate cancer genes. There's pancreas cancer genes when there's a mutation. Colon cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things. So one of the things that we do at the onset is to look at the entire family history. What cancers are in the family? Because
that really gives you information.
Yes. What ages were people diagnosed? We very often have people who say, well, my grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 30, but she lived to be 85, so I don't need to worry about it. And she may still be alive, but it's the age that she was diagnosed. And there are some clues that we look for in terms of testing. So especially for BRCA1 and BRCA2, some of the things, and I'm sure I'm going to forget some of them, but the main ones are being diagnosed with breast cancer before the age of 50.
Like somebody in your family.
You or somebody in your family. If someone has what we call bilateral breast cancer, or two separate incidences of breast cancer. So this isn't a spread or a recurrence, it's two separate events. If a man has breast cancer, that's a real red flag. And ovarian cancer, people don't realize, is a very not so common cancer. Less than 1%, well, let me rephrase that. A woman's lifetime risk of ovarian cancer is less than 1% in the general population. That's a really low number. So if anybody has ovarian cancer, regardless of the age, or they have a family member with ovarian cancer, they should consider testing. And women who have what's called triple negative breast cancer under the age of 60 is another clue.
And how far, like as far as their family goes, like if they had like a cousin who had something, like 3 times removed, that doesn't really count. You're just really looking for like a mother or an aunt, a grandmother.
And well, great aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews and some cousins, we like to see a pattern. And I don't think anybody will be faulted for giving more information rather than less information. So we'll take it and we'll see where it goes from there.
But sometimes people don't associate it, so.
Which is why we try to clue people.
Because you kind of like connect the dots.
You think mom, dad, brothers, sisters, grandparents, and that's it. But no, it's really more than that.
Yeah.
And in families that where someone's an only child or they only have brothers, that can mask a mutation. There's not a lot of women to develop the cancers that we're looking for. So we look for, it's like putting together a puzzle, and we try to put it together.
It seems like. And you said that like nowadays you can do a lot more testing. Like it seems like just even in the past 5 years things have evolved so much. And do you see like anything, any new things coming up like in the horizon?
Well, we know that there's got to be new things coming up. I mean, we just don't know. It's those known unknowns that we know about. But there's some new mutations that we just don't know all the cancers that are involved because we just don't see them that often. Remember, it's rare to have a mutation in any case. The ones we know the most about, BRCA1 and BRCA2, make up the vast majority of what we see in breast cancer genetic mutations. So these other ones we don't see as often, so it's going to take a while to accumulate the knowledge that we need to say, well, not only does it increase your risk of breast cancer, but also these other cancers.
Wow. So, so wrapping up, Judy, do you have like any final words of wisdom for, you've given us such good information and really hopefully motivating our audience to take action if they feel like they need to.
To think about, to look at family history.
Yeah.
The one thing I do like to caution is there's a lot of people that have, I don't know if cavalier is the right word, but it's just, let me check this off my to-do list, that I'll get genetic testing. But genetic testing is something that you can't change. If you have a high cholesterol, your doctor will start you on a statin and exercise and diet, etc. If you're anemic, you'll take iron, things will get better. Your genetic test results cannot be changed. The risk can be modified. We can lower the risk. There are things we can recommend that we didn't even get into today. But there are actionable things you can do. But it's just to know that you can't unring the bell once it's rung. And there is no increased risk of childhood cancer, so don't think about testing your children. Wait till they're like 25 or so.
Well, that's so fascinating. Thank you, Judy. So we're going to take a quick short break, and so be right back. I'm Nira Berry, host of Happy and Healthy.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes. You can do it here. But I get it, you're busy. And busy people can't have prediabetes. I read that wrong. They can, okay? Just go to the site.
Hi, welcome back to Happy and Healthy. I'm Nira Berry, your host, and we're here with Judy Macon. She's going to tell us more about genetics and what we need to know. And I know that there's a lot of different types of genetic testing, and I'm sure people are wondering, does insurance cover it? Is there a fee for this?
Oh, of course there's a fee.
It's not free?
Nobody's doing this out of the goodness of their heart. But up until a few years ago, there was one genetics company that had a patent on the genes, and they were the only ones that could test for BRCA1 and BRCA2.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So there was a Supreme Court ruling that said that you can't patent genes. So there are other companies now offering cancer genetic testing. And I will say some are better than others. I'm not going to mention any names right now. But because the market has opened up, if you will, costs have changed.
Oh.
So it's getting
That's good
less
for the
expensive.
Average person.
Absolutely, it's good for the average person, because it may be appropriate for someone to have genetic testing, but they don't meet their insurance requirements, so they're going to have to pay out of pocket. But I am happy to say that most insurances do pay for genetic testing.
Oh.
You just have to
That's good
meet
to
their
know.
criteria. Absolutely, absolutely. Interestingly, Medicare will pay 100% of genetic testing, but only if you are personally affected with cancer. So if, for example,
you're just curious.
Well, no, not just that, but what if, for example, you're a man and all 5 of your sisters died of breast or ovarian cancer, and you want to know the risk for your children because you haven't had breast or ovarian or prostate cancer, Medicare won't pay for it. But it is appropriate. Yeah, you have to be affected. So it is appropriate to consider testing, but we'd want to go to one of the companies that charges much less because you're paying out of pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's
it's
really
good to have options.
Yeah.
It's good to have options. Absolutely.
It really is. Well, thank you for that information. So are the tests more accurate now than they were in the past? Because I know like everything's evolving.
Right,
and so,
right.
You know.
Well, let me give you an example of BRCA1 and BRCA2. When the testing was done way back when, it was like reading a book and looking for a misspelled word. You were looking for where is the misspelling that's making the gene go awry. And that's the only way we knew to look for the mutation. What turned up later is there's a different way to look at BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations. And that, as an example, is looking for a paragraph that's missing. So not just a word, but a whole paragraph. It's a different way the lab has to look at the gene. It's not that what they did before was wrong.
Yeah.
It's the same thing they do now. We just know that there's other things we can do. So for women and men who had testing maybe years ago, they may not have had this looking for the paragraph missing.
Yeah.
It's called a large rearrangement test. And of course, we know that there's other breast cancer genes. So for women and men that were tested a while ago, they may want to revisit it. It's not that it's inaccurate. What they were tested for is accurate. We just know there's more to be tested for.
And there's so many other, tests as well, like for
Yes.
other types of cancer.
Exactly,
and that maybe weren't on the horizon,
Right.
5 years ago as well.
Yeah.
And so,
I'll have a woman come in who's been recently diagnosed with breast cancer, and she might be older, and maybe there's one case of breast cancer in the family, but she's really concerned about her breast cancer risk and is there a genetic mutation. When you take the family history, you realize that there's cancers that we associate with other cancer syndromes. And it's like, well, you shouldn't be so worried about your breast cancer risk. Let's worry about your colon cancer risk.
Yeah.
And it turns out that indeed they might have a colon cancer mutation. And that wasn't on their radar screen at all. So that's why it's important to not just stick your arm out or spit in a tube.
But to meet with
someone like a genetics counselor, risk assessment counselor, to understand and look at the big picture, because I will say there's some insurance companies that once you've been tested once, that's it for your lifetime.
I see.
So even if more tests come out, something different, they may only pay that one time.
Oh.
So it's important that if you've got the one shot to make sure you're
do
covering all your bases.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I know you mentioned before, you mentioned Angelina Jolie.
Yeah.
And so, so tell me more about that.
Well, anytime that a celebrity has something done, and we can go back to the days of Betty Ford, when she was so open about her breast cancer diagnosis, women went running for mammograms. Mammography rates spiked and stayed pretty high. So it is helpful
to have awareness.
Exactly, and it's good to have someone that is a celebrity to kind of promote the cause. Well, there have been other famous people that have had genetic mutations, but Angelina Jolie is so much out there in so
really
many
made
ways.
it public.
She really is. But I have to laugh because I've had several people come in and say to me, well, I want to have testing done to know if I need to have the Angelina Jolie done. And it always sounds like a delicatessen order to me, I mean, it's a serious subject,
I'll have
I
the corned
know.
beef on rye,
Right.
please. Yeah.
Right, hold the mustard. I'll have the Angelina Jolie. No mustard on whole wheat. So... But what people are asking is, do I need to have this surgery? Do I need to think about what the road that she went down? And so it is promoting awareness, and that is a good thing. And it's just funny, though, that people say they want the Angelina Jolie.
I'll have the number one, please.
Exactly.
So you must come across a lot of interesting situations with people, coming in and, just as you mentioned about the Angelina Jolie and any other interesting situations?
Well, I mean, mean, we're laughing a little bit about that, but genetics is really quite serious, and it can be life-altering for people who either have a mutation or don't have a mutation. And two of the nicest stories I can think of have to do with young women. One was recently married, newlyweds, and there was a lot of cancer in the family, but she wanted to know whether or not there was a genetic mutation. Nobody had tested. In fact, people were kind of in denial. They didn't want to test. So she did test, and she did have a genetic mutation, which you might think would be devastating to a newly married couple because they have choices about, you know, children, et cetera, et cetera. And she and her husband just kind of stepped up to the plate and said, okay, well, you know, we were going to delay childbearing for about 4 or 5 years, but I think we'll just get started now. And they just kind of incorporated it into their life plan. And he was very supportive. And she had a good attitude about, you know, this is what she needed to do. And I hope we do get a chance in a little bit to talk about what the options are for once you've found out that you do have a genetic mutation. But on the opposite end, there was another young lady whose mother did have a mutation, had cancer, did have a mutation, and they had a very good relationship. So the daughter had been very supportive of her mother throughout her whole cancer journey, and she was young, I think, when she was diagnosed. So throughout all her middle school years, all her high school years, she just said, well, when I get older, I'll have both my breasts removed, and there's just no choice in the matter. I mean, it was really kind of sad.
That's tough. You know,
and
it's a
she was very resistant to testing. And I would have never tested her when she was younger. But when she was in her 20s, I talked to her mom. I said, you know, how's your daughter doing? She said, well, you know, she's still terrified. She's still on this path that she's going to have surgery without even testing. And so we came up with a strategy to talk about education rather than you're not coming in for testing, you're just coming in to find out information.
And this poor girl must have been so terrified all those years.
Absolutely. So she came in and we just talked. We didn't talk about testing, we just talked about what it meant. And at the end of the whole session, the young woman says, I want to have testing done. And her mother sort of did this 180 of, are you sure? And she was just so shocked because she had tried to talk to her for years and years how important it was. She said, no, now I'm ready for testing. We did the testing, and lo and behold, her test came out negative. She did not have the mutation that her mother had.
Tears to my eyes.
But what that did, not that you can't ever get cancer if you don't have a mutation, which I know sounds like a double negative, but your risk goes down to the general population's risk, not high like someone who does have a mutation. So this, you could just see the weight lifted off her shoulders. So that was kind of a nice story, and I just felt bad that she had kind of worried and suffered all those years.
But what a difference that made for this girl's life.
Testing is very powerful. It can be very powerful in a proactive way, and it can be very powerful in taking a lot of the stress and burden off.
I mean, I always say that knowledge is power. That's the way I operate. Some people would rather not know.
Right.
And I always feel like sometimes that we worry more about things than what the reality is.
But you have to respect that.
Yes,
you know,
of course.
Everybody comes to genetic testing in their own time frame.
Yes.
And you know, there's no increased risk of childhood cancer. So you really, even if you have a mutation, you're not going to test your 8-year-old or your 15-year-old.
What age would you start testing?
For women, the recommendation is 25. And the reason is that at 25, if you have a mutation, that's when you would start surveillance and screening for certain things. So testing in teenage years, it just gives you all that time to worry about it because there's nothing that we would recommend before that. For men, because they tend not to show the cancers, they usually wait until they're starting families of their own because they want to know for their children.
Yeah. So, like, let's say somebody does come in and test positive for one of the mutations, whether or not it's colon cancer or prostate cancer, or what happens then?
Well, we do go over recommendations, and I don't think that this segment is long enough for us to go through all of them.
No, but it's not necessarily a death sentence, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So let's say BRCA1 and BRCA2. So again, we can go back to the Angelina Jolie effect. So Angelina Jolie chose to have her breasts removed, which is called a prophylactic mastectomy, but she also had her ovaries removed Because for women, the two big cancers with BRCA1 and BRCA2 are breast and ovarian cancer. But there are other things you can do. Certainly, mastectomy reduces your risk as much as possible, but many women opt to do close surveillance, which would find something early. It wouldn't prevent something, but it would find something early. And that is you being aware of your breasts, going for a doctor's visit where they feel your breasts. That's called a clinical breast examination every 6 months. Starting from age 25 to 30, have an annual breast MRI. And then at 30, you add in a mammogram and then a breast MRI. So you're having something diagnostic every 6 months.
So you would counsel them as to what they need to do,
Absolutely.
and they're not like on their own.
No,
So
not
I
at
think
all.
that's so wonderful.
But,
so
yeah, there's something that I do want to stress because there is no good way to detect ovarian cancer at an early stage. It's been tried, we just don't have it yet. So for the recommendation today is when you're through having your children, have your ovaries and fallopian tubes removed. That's the only way we know to prevent ovarian cancer because it's a deadly cancer.
Yeah.
We can't find it early, so it tends to be at a later stage. But the one thing that people I think don't know about is that if a woman has her ovaries removed before she goes through the change of life, so premenopausally, and again, we're only talking about women who test positive for a mutation, if they have their ovaries removed premenopausally, not only does that reduce their ovarian cancer risk almost 100%, it reduces breast cancer risk by close to 70%.
Wow.
70%, which is something
This is all
women
really good
don't
information.
know.
Yeah.
And
This
taking
is
birth control
wonderful.
pills can help reduce your risk of ovarian cancer. So there are things that people just don't know about, and we would talk to them about that.
And so that's why it's really important. I think that you gave all this really good information about getting genetic testing and how it's something that we can all use.
We did it at warp speed.
Yeah, there's so much more to know about.
Absolutely.
So I thank you so much, Judy, for being my guest. And if somebody wants more information, how can they reach you?
They can reach me either by email or phone. Email is jmacon4, so JMACON, the number 4, at jhmi.edu. My phone number is 301-896-2445. And they can always go through the Suburban Hospital website and find me, but it's much easier to call me or email me.
Contact you directly. So thank you so much. It was very, very informative. So thank you for watching Healthy and Happy. My name is Nira Berry, your host, and stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Nira Berry, your host of Happy and Healthy. And now I'm going to share with you what's good to know. So I get asked often, Nira, how do I feel even happier? Like, I'm doing okay, but how does somebody become more happy? So I have one word for you, and that's grateful. And being grateful, that's really one of the keys to being happy. And you think, well, what's that all about? Well, it's actually something really important. There's so many scientific studies that have shown that one of the ways that you can do it is if you keep a grateful journal. And I know that a pillow like this may remind you of being grateful, but keeping a journal is also a way of reminding you about being grateful as well. And the scientific studies showed that if you write in a journal every night before you go to sleep 3 things that you were grateful for that day, then you could actually change from being a negative person to being a positive person. It's just amazing. So all you have to do is write 3 different things before you go to sleep every night for 21 days. And it really would be the equivalent of you looking out, like for instance at the beginning, looking out of the window, and what do you notice? Like maybe you notice a field of weeds, for instance. But what if after 21 days, you could look out that same window and then you'd see a field of flowers? And it's the same thing, that when you write in this journal for 21 days, you'll notice that you'll start looking for those positives in your life. You'll start noticing like, wow, that's a good thing, and that's a good thing, and that's a good thing. And then you start being a more positive person and a happier person. So how about if you try it? I bet you'll see that you're actually going to be like the positive results that people got in the study, that you also will end up being a happier and more positive person. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Nira Berry, your host of Happy and Healthy. And if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to contact me at happyandhealthytv@gmail.com. So have a happy day.